Evelyn Gould is joining us right now, and we haven't had the opportunity to be with you for a couple of weeks because I was away, you were away, and I'm thrilled to have you back. Welcome back. It is always so wonderful to have you in here. I was saying earlier, I was saying nice things about you behind your back. I always like to tell people when I say nice things behind their back. But I was saying how you always give us and me permission to have my feelings, to be where I'm at, and that's such a wonderful thing. So thank you always for being you and for being here. Now I'm getting all mushy. It's that kind of a day. But I asked you to come in today to talk about bullying because this is something that you've been talking about for a little while now, and I think it's a subject that we can't talk enough about. So I'm ready. Enlighten me. What shall we talk about today? Because there's many things to talk about with bullying.
Yeah, I mean, what do you want to know?
Well, I want to know how we can help our kids, because clearly the studies, I think you've said to us before, show that our children are more likely to be bullied than not.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there isn't very much research out there, to be honest, especially with regards to bullying, well, basically with regards to bullying and special needs in general, but specifically autism. But there's been a couple of recent studies. One was published, I think, in 2010, and by Twyman and colleagues, and they were looking at children aged 8 to, let me get this right, 15, I'm thinking, I can't remember exactly, with ASD, and they found that they were 2 or 3 more times probably more likely to be bullied.
Yeah, which is shocking to me in a way. When I look at it completely unemotionally, I go, okay, I guess I can see that. But on a mom level, I hear that. I hear 8, and I, you know, I've shared on the show that we had a little bit of experience with bullying for the first time this year. My son was 8, and I was unprepared. I really thought that was more of a high school thing. What rock was I living under? Because clearly, it makes sense to me. But on an emotional level, I wasn't ready for it. Yeah,
and the other report that came out that we talked about on the show before was by the AIN community, and that's the Kennedy Krieger Research Institute or so on. And they just released some preliminary information, basically, to kind of, with respect to all the parents who participated in their survey, and they found very similar result. It seemed to suggest that maybe kids with ASD were about 2/3 more likely to be bullied than even their typical peers or whatever, their siblings.
Yeah, I want to pause for just a second. For those of you who aren't familiar with the IAN project, as Evelyn was saying, it's the Kennedy Krieger Institute that does that, and you can all register. It's for free. You can register both yourself and anybody else who is involved with your child, and can register your child, and they will send you questionnaires from time to time asking you questions, and then they'll send you the research to let you know. It's a really important project because the more of us who participate, the more information that there is.
Exactly. The more people that participate, the more information, the more generalizable the information that's provided, and the more it tells them about, or they get a better picture of what everyone's going through, not just the specific people that are already involved in the project.
And I remember the first time that when they started it and we participated and we got the first big study that came back, and I remember looking at it, and a lot of it for me was that duh moment that I talk about from time to time, where I looked at them, I was like, well, duh. You know, that they said that parents experience a high level of stress when they have a child. Well, duh. But you know, studies like that, as much as I can duh them, they're really important because it lets the world know, and also gives us permission, like you do, to say, okay, it's not just me.
Exactly. I think it's very important because a lot of this probably isn't surprising, or a lot of this information isn't surprising to the people who are experiencing it.
Yeah.
But in terms of being heard and having people take notice and put in place policies or strategies, or be like, you know, this is a real problem, we have to do something about it, you really need to be putting the research out there, because it's basically evidence to say this is a real problem.
Yeah.
And you know, you kind of have a bigger voice then to get your needs met, or to get your kids' needs met.
And I'll tell you, one of the things that came out of that study that was not a duh for me, that I thought a lot of people heard, they didn't hear loud enough, but the parents reported that the stress that they had, while you would think that the stress about how their child was doing, or the stress about the finances, both of those things registered high, but the highest stress overall that all parents reported was the stress in getting services.
Yeah.
And that for me, because I literally thought that that was just me. And to find out that it was everyone resoundingly said that the fight with schools, that the fight with agencies, with the fight with insurance, that was the biggest stress.
And interestingly, I know of research that's been done in the UK, because this is research done in America, but I'm not obviously from America, but I know that the research done in the UK has shown that, or suggested that a big bulk of stress for parents there is the same thing. So getting services and fighting to get the services that they need and that they want for their child.
Yeah. And I think that was eye-opening for us as parents, that we realized, okay, that we're all feeling this. It's a real thing. And I think for some organizations, it was certainly an eye-opener of, okay, we need to address this. This is a stressful part of this, and it does not need to be. So very interesting, so very useful. So Ian Project, you can Google it and participate in that. All right, we've digressed. But worthwhile digressions.
So we were just talking about why it's important, I guess, to talk about bullying, and one of them is that it seems that children with ASD are more vulnerable to bullying. And in that, and that's very important to know about, because obviously bullying can have significant effects in short-term and long-term on children's well-being in general, and that goes for the bullies and the children being bullied. And one of those is this idea of FAPE, or vape, whatever you want to call it.
Vape. Yes. Yeah, I was like, FAPE? Is that a drink? FAPE?
Vape. So the free appropriate public education, and every child has a right to a free appropriate public education.
Exactly.
And of course, if you have a child who's being bullied, it's quite likely that that's going to interfere with their ability to access their education and to learn. I mean, it can have, obviously, if it's very aggressive physically, it could have physical consequences, but we're more concerned about what it does psychologically in the long term. And how that can create a whole bunch of problems for the child or even the bully, in terms of going to school, remaining in school, interacting with peers, and so on. So that's very, very important. If your child's not accessing the education, then they need to be.
I think that's a really important point, Evelyn, that I hadn't been aware of, because if you have been on this journey for any period of time, that you're going to regular IEPs, and the FAPE word is the be-all, end-all, that free appropriate public education, because the school has a legal obligation to meet it. And if they are in violation, it's really difficult for them. And when bullying happens, the argument can be made, there is precedent, that it is violating FAPE. So it is a place to stand on.
Exactly, because if your child's not accessing their education and the school is not taking significant steps, or it fails to take steps to end that bullying problem and to help your child access their education, then they're in violation.
Right, and there's a whole host of things that go along with that. You definitely want to consult with some legal people about what. I'll tell you, just saying to somebody when you're talking to them about bullying at school and saying, we're in violation of FAPE here, lights a fire.
Yes, and the other thing that lights a fire is the possibility that the bullying, if you show that it's in relation to the child's disability, that's disability harassment.
Yes.
And that's actually illegal under, I think, the American for Disabilities Act, and the other one is the 504 something or other that I can't remember the name of now, but there's there's two acts there. So if your school doesn't do anything about it, or doesn't take appropriate steps to end the bullying and work with you, then they could be in violation of state law and federal law and so on.
It gets really serious. And I think that's important to know, because sometimes if your child is being bullied, not only does it feel like your child is being victimized, but as a parent, you go to the school, and if you feel like things aren't happening and that nothing's being done, you begin to feel like a victim too. And it's important to know where you're empowered. And these laws are in place, and it's important language to use. Disability harassment and violation of FAPE, boy, things start moving if you start saying those words.
And you can also Actually, I'm just thinking, you know, it's important to say that we support teachers as well, because it's not always parents against teachers. Like, teachers have a hard time because bullying mostly, or a great deal of bullying, happens whenever teachers are not around, and it can be very difficult for them to pinpoint bullying or even know that it's going on.
Yes.
But you may also have a teacher who does know what's going on but is not getting anywhere. You might, if you are a teacher and you know about bullying and you feel like no one's listening to you and you're feeling kind of paralyzed, or you're getting the blame for something, and then it's really important that you start throwing those kind of terms around and making it, and emphasising to whoever is your supervisor or in charge of the anti-bullying policies and so on at your school, that you emphasise to them how serious it is, and you try and do what you can there and work with the parents, because you are the one that's going to be liable. The school's going to be liable at the end of the day.
Thank you for bringing that up, Evelyn, because I don't think, I say all the time I'm a former teacher, and that I think that the vast majority of teachers are really remarkable angels on this earth. The things that they do and the passion that they feel for teaching our kids. There are exceptions, right? We all know that there are exceptions, but the vast majority are people who really mean it well.
I can't say that I've come across many teachers who want to turn a blind eye to bullying.
Yeah.
And they want the best for the kids in their class.
Absolutely.
So most teachers are definitely going to want to work with you on that. Yes. And if they aren't doing anything, it's probably because they don't realise that it's going on, or they're having difficulty with proving that it's going on because it's happening when they're not around, or whatever reason, or perhaps they're getting some resistance from other people in the school, and so on. I mean, every school should have an anti-bullying policy, so that's definitely something to look at right away. And if your school doesn't have an anti-bullying policy, then they need to get one, and that goes for teachers or parents. If you're a teacher and you know your school doesn't have a policy, make them adopt guidelines.
Absolutely.
And if you're a parent, the same thing.
Absolutely. Very important. And that's something that you can do on your own, or do through the PTA, or, you can just say, I need to have a meeting with the principal and say, this is what's important. There are different things online. I know we had Maria Dismonde, who's an author of The Juicebox Bully, on this show a couple of months ago. She, in her book, The Juicebox Bully, there is a pledge at the back of the book that could easily be taken out. It's online. If you have nothing else, you can do that.
Absolutely. There's plenty of kind of templates and things and ideas online that can help you, or as a teacher or as a parent, to come up with some kind of policy and policy guidelines.
Okay, great information. Let's take a little bit of a break, and then when we come back, I'm going to ask you to talk about, as parents and as teachers, what we can do to empower the child who's being bullied. But then I want to talk about what we do to empower the group around them as well, because I know that that's a really important thing. So stick with us. Back with more with Evelyn Gould talking about bullying in just a few minutes. Welcome back to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod. I'm here with Evelyn Gould. She's a BCBA, a board-certified behavior analyst, and we're talking about bullying. We just talked about all the reasons why it's important to talk about bullying, and some of the different things that can be empowering for parents and for teachers if bullying is happening. And we know that it's more likely to happen with our kids on the autism spectrum. But I want to know, Evelyn, what are some things that we can do to empower our children so that we can make bullying less likely to happen, but also when it does happen, what can we do to empower them so that they know how to deal with it?
Well, one thing I wanted to just mention that I was thinking about in the break for parents is to remember that not to worry about being wrong.
Okay.
So not to worry about, if you don't have to know your child's being bullied for sure to talk to your school about it, and I think that's really important. It's better to assume that it could happen or it is happening, and that's okay. If it's not happening, it's still good because you put in place prevention strategies, if that makes sense, because part of the problem with our kids with autism, as you'll know, is that maybe our kids can't tell us, and it may not be obvious that something's happening to them at school. Like they may not have the communicative abilities to tell us, but they may also not realize that they're being bullied. I've seen that quite a bit actually, and the kids just don't know, and just because they don't know doesn't mean that it won't necessarily have an effect on them. Either it could still be interfering with their learning, or their ability to fit in at school, but also maybe later on they could look back at that if they do develop the ability to kind of take the perspective of other people, and they may look back on those experiences and then it has an effect on them.
Yeah.
So it's really important. And then sometimes our kids don't know they're being bullies as well.
Yeah.
Like maybe they're misinterpreting someone's intentions and reacting, or for whatever reason, they just don't have the skills to interact in a more friendly way with their peers, and they just don't realize that it's not okay.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if they've been in an environment in which they've been bullied and didn't know the terms for it, but saw that other people were reinforced for it, there's every likelihood that they're going to start to react that way too.
There's lots of different reasons why it might happen. So it's just really important to kind of go in thinking, it could, even if it's not, it could happen in the future, and I'm going to make sure that there's stuff in place, and I work with my skills so that it doesn't happen to my child. So just don't worry about being wrong.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, because, you know, I've talked a little bit about last year that my son first came to me and said that some stuff was happening, and you know, I, in the moment, said to him, well, you know, don't listen to them, and kind of a little bit poo-pooed it, and I'm a little ashamed of that, I have to be honest. And then of course it escalated, and I still, after it escalated, felt funny about going, and I have a great relationship with my principal, and I have a great relationship with my son's teacher at the time, and I still felt funny because I didn't want to be, you know what I mean? Yeah. And but I did, you know, I felt funny about it, but I said, hey, look, we can't let this go. But I felt a little funny about it. So thank you for saying, you know, it's okay.
I mean, you just got to remember that the worst that's happening here is that you're standing up for your child and you're advocating for your child's safety and for their ability to access an education. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely no one can tell you that that's not okay.
Yeah. But I do think that there is a thing amongst parents, we overcome it all the time, where we feel like, oh, you know, I got to pick my battles. I got to, you know, I don't, because if I fight about this, then, you know, because I got to be with them at the IEP thing, is it going to mean I don't get this, you know? You go through all of those different things, but at the end of the day, our kids are what's most important.
Exactly, and it's also about how you fight the battle. You don't need to go into your school assuming that they're not doing anything and they're terrible and they don't have a policy and there's bullying going on and no one cares. Like, you don't have to go in thinking that. You can go in and just ask some questions.
Yes.
And no one's going to be angry with you about that, and if they are, then that's an alarm bell.
Yes.
Because schools should be open and welcoming of questions like, oh, I'm just interested in what your anti-bullying policy is, and how have you dealt with bullying in the past, and those kind of questions are fine. Or, you know, I'm slightly worried about my child maybe being vulnerable. What can you tell me about how you deal with it, or what, is there things that we can do, or you know, just asking some probing questions, and you'll get a sense of, probably as a parent's instinct, you'll probably get a sense of whether you feel more comforted by what they say or not, or you need to talk to them more in detail. And then you can lead into sort of, well, I would like to put some strategies in my IEP or so on. And really no one can argue with any of those, that, you know, that's not being oppositional or difficult, that's just talking about it.
That's a wonderful thing to remind us all, Evelyn, because it, you know, I know for a lot of you, it feels like when you go to the IEP meeting, it doesn't matter what you say, it can feel, it isn't always, but it feels oppositional. It feels like you're fighting for your life and your child's life, is what it feels like, and somebody's got you by the throat. And you're afraid you're going to say or do the wrong thing, and it's going to cost your child something. It's a lot of responsibility. So thank you for reminding that it's just a conversation, and that you're not being oppositional when you're asking for what is appropriate. And it is clearly appropriate. Any school that is not arguing that they should not be arguing with you that they absolutely all should have a bullying policy. And anybody who doesn't and is arguing about it, big warning signs.
And if they're completely denying that there's any bullying or that ever any bullying, that's an alarm bell to me too, because we know that the incident, like, there's a high incidence of bullying, and just in general in the population. We don't really know exactly what it is, because there's lots of different reports and there's lots of reasons for that. I mean, one of the reasons is that perhaps the teachers just don't know what's going on, because it's happening not when they're around, or maybe, you know, and it's also very subjective. Like, one teacher might interpret something as being, oh, that's just kids, but they don't look at the effect that it's having on the children, perhaps, or not considering that one child really takes stuff to heart more than another child, or interprets it differently from another child. it's more about the effects rather than what it looks like, and that's what's really important.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point. That I have in the past had people say to me, when I say, my son is concerned about this, and they go, well, but that's not reality. And my thing is saying, but it is to him. He feels like that's happening, and that's what we have to deal with. Whether it's actually what's happening, it feels like it to him, so we need to deal with that. And it seems crystal clear to me, but for some people, they're like, well, but that's not happening.
I mean, I think it's definitely easier for us to see it that way, because once you get into the behaviour analysis world, then it's everything we do is about function and why something's happening and what effects it's having, rather than what it looks like. So it is easier for us to look at bullying and not really care about what it looks like, but care about, we would define it as bullying based on what the effects are, rather than what the behavior looks like. Which is a really interesting distinction. So what do we do for our kids at home and in the classroom to help them to be less likely to be bullied? Let's start with that. Okay, well, first of all, you need to do all the things that we just said. So talking to your school, make sure your BCBA, if you have a BCBA working with you in your home or with your child in the school, whatever, make sure that they know that you're concerned about bullying. And so, because if they don't know, then they won't necessarily incorporate teaching or lessons or whatever behaviour management strategies that are specifically hopefully going to help with preventing your child or making your child less vulnerable. So it's really important to make sure everybody's on board and everyone knows that it's a concern and that it's a priority for you. Give me an example of what one of those strategies might be, because it's different for every child, right? Yeah, well, it's different for every child, but for example, at the really basic level, we know that kids who can make friends or have good friendships or peers around them are much less vulnerable to bullying. So we're going to look at specific deficits that your child has in the area of maintaining friendships, or what can we do to so that they have friends around them, or kind of peers to kind of collaborate with. So we're going to look at social skills in terms of conversation, perhaps, or attention, how can the child initiate attention, or how can we get them so that they can play alongside other peers, or can we teach them interest, to have shared interests with their peers. That's a big one. What are their peers interested in? How can we get our kid to be able to know what to talk to them about, or what not to talk to them about, or how to know when to stop talking about something. Rather than continue going on and on and on about something that's really interesting to them but their peers don't care about. Or how can we enable them to be able to join in with certain things, all those types of things. And likewise, being able, if the other child is stuck on a topic that they're not interested in, how to be a part of that conversation and steer the topic to something else. Exactly. So all these kind of things. Maybe we know that kids can be more vulnerable if they're engaging in certain non-typical behaviours that make them stand out. So anything that attracts a lot of attention from peers can make a child vulnerable to bullying, like stereotypy, for example, so repetitive kind of behaviours, or even just meltdowns, challenging behaviours. If you have a child who's very rigid or inflexible about change in general, or things have to be done in a very specific way, it becomes very easy for peers to kind of push buttons and cause the child to have a meltdown. Or just, if the child's having a meltdown over something that the peers just can't make sense of or think is silly, then they're going to attract negative attention. Or perhaps you get a child who has something odd about the way that they talk. For example, they have strange prosody going on. So they're not, by prosody I mean not using the appropriate kind of emotion in your voice, or inflection, or volume, pitch, kind of that kind of thing. So they just sound a bit strange. I've definitely worked with a child who was picked on because he sounded a little bit strange. He kind of had a little strange sing-songy thing going on. And other children I've worked with have had odd accents, which are not related to their family at all. It's maybe they've got something from TV, or they're imitating something and they just sound a bit strange, and the peers just pick on them for that reason. So those are all types of things that your BCBA would work with you to identify. Well, what are things that the child is doing that could potentially attract attention, unwanted attention from peers, and how can we help them work on those things?
I think really important. That's hard for me. It's emotional for me because I think really, you know, we're then teaching our kids to fit in, and I wish the bullies would just stop. But it is important that we make our kids aware of themselves and what they're doing and the reactions that come with it. I think that that's really important.
I mean, obviously, we need to educate the parent, the child, or the children in the school, and the teachers and everyone else, and it's very important to educate everybody so that we try and foster a more accepting environment and a more supportive environment. I mean, also like things like buddy programs and peer advocacy programs work. From the research, and it seems like they work extremely well in preventing bullying, and just generally teaching the other kids to support each other. But the reality is that that is not enough. You know, we do need to help our kids fit in, and that's just the world. Unfortunately, that is the real world.
And there are some benefits to it. I mean, the whole idea of working on having your child be able to gain friendship and maintain a friendship and keep a friendship, I think that's something we all want.
Absolutely.
I don't think anybody would be opposed to that, and that helps to make your child more Teflon, for lack of a better term, when it comes to bullying. So
I think it's very important to just emphasize that the whole point of what, I mean, for me as a behaviour analyst, I want to give my children choices. And in order to give them life choices, I need to give them all the tools that so they can then use those tools to function in the world. And if I don't give them those tools, then their choices are limited in terms of how they work, kind of interact with their world.
Very well said. Okay, you touched a little bit about the group, though, that surrounds kids. And there is some evidence that when we, like you were saying, the buddying, that when we educate those other kids and ask for them to band together, that has effect on decreasing bullying.
Yeah, it's really important that everyone takes responsibility for bullying. So, and that means that you're not just focusing in on the child who's being bullied and just fixing the child being bullied, because that's not really going to address bullying. Is more like a global problem, and there's nothing to say that your child, someone else might not come along and bully your child for something else that you didn't deal with, or that the bully will then bully another child in the classroom, and we don't really want that either. You know, it's really a global problem, so everyone needs to be involved, and so we want to change. We want to help the child who's being bullied. We also want to teach skills in the same way that we're teaching the child who's being bullied new skills and decreasing problem behaviours. We want to do the same for the bully. Exactly the same thing. The bully has deficits too, and that's why they're struggling with a lot of things too, and that's why they're behaving in that way. So we need to help them to modify their behaviour, and then kind of change the entire environment around that. So like what you're saying, that's the kids in the classroom, the peers. It's also about educating and maybe changing teacher behaviour and school policies at the top level and so on. So I don't know, we didn't really say what buddy programs and advocacy programs
are. Well, let's talk about that. Maybe
someone doesn't know what they are. But the buddy program is just usually where you get the older children kind of palling up with a younger child and being like kind of like a mentor idea, and that can really work well in terms of preventing bullying. It's everyone, kind of the older kids are taking responsibility for the younger kids getting on well and kind of protecting them a little bit. And then the advocacy program is basically where all the children in the class stand up for each other against bullying. And I think there's some research out there to show that a lot of the bullying incidences will stop when a peer, or the majority will stop when a peer kind of steps in and stands up for another peer. And I think, Shannon, you told me a story about your kid recently. Palling up, this idea of a peer in the class, like kind of palling up with your son to come up with some kind of peer strategy. They actually came up with their own peer strategy.
They did. Well, I was running around and asking everybody here and getting everybody's advice and trying to figure out what I was going to do and how what was I going to do to help the school to get bullying under control, and trying all these different things with my child, all of which I'm sure were helpful and useful. And my son, who was having an issue with somebody at school, and he's in the choir, and somebody said something to him, and it culminated, there were all these different things, culminated with him crying. because the person had said something to him. And this is after we'd all talked about everything, and it's still happening. And we're trying all these different things. It's still happening. The child says something to him. He bursts into tears. An older child in the choir went to him, put her arm around him, and said, you know what? That boy talks to all of us that way. We're not putting up with it. He's done that to me before. Don't you cry. It's okay. I'm going to stand here with you. She took the initiative. My son was in 3rd grade at the time. I believe she was in 4th grade at the time. So they were in choir together. And the other little boy, it was very interesting because, you know, it's all too easy for me in the past when it did involve my child to vilify the bully and go, the bully is... And yet I knew this child, and he's sweet. His parents are sweet. He's got some, you know, some behavior things going on. I don't think he realized the effect that he was having until the other girl came and said, you're not doing this anymore. And I'm standing with him, and enough of this. And then he was very apologetic and has been so sweet to my son ever since. But then, you know, and I was saying, okay, well, this is better. Things are going to get better. But then this girl and my son, the last 3 days of school, got together. And this is what they came up with. My son had a book of Star Wars stickers at school with him, and he decided that they were going to ask people to be part of a anti-bully club, him and this girl. And she was keeping a chart, and anybody who signed up got a free Star Wars sticker from my son's book. And he would go out on the playground, and they set up a table, and they were calling kids over saying, do you want a free sticker? Well, you have to sign up to be a part of this club that says you won't bully, and you won't participate in it, and you won't allow it to happen while you're standing there, watch it. And they came up with this completely on their own, did not tell me until they were already doing it, and did like the trial run the last 3 days of school. He's already so excited and amassing stickers for when he goes back to school. I was very proud of him, very proud of this other little girl who said, no, I'm not going to stand here. And you know what? It was so humbling to me because all these things that all the machinations of what I had planned, you know, building the Taj Mahal of anti-bullying for the school. And it took one little girl to stand up and say to my son, and what she said to him was so much more powerful than everything that I had said. I had said to him, you know what, he's got his own issues, don't take it personally, and this little girl said, no, he's made me feel that way before too, and we're not doing it anymore. And that's what he listened to, the power of another child. Holy
Absolutely.
moly.
And I think that's the key. That's why these advocacy programs work really well, because it's the peers supporting the peers.
Yeah.
And then, of course, remembering things like not only the power of the peer influence, but that the peers are there all the time when teachers are not. So children are everywhere all the time whenever the adults can't be. So that's really why it's really powerful as well.
Yeah, and especially I think when they get to 8, I'm learning this, that the kids, I mean, I'm definitely seeing this with my son, but I definitely see it with the other kids too, that we're now the adults, and on some front, they just automatically dismiss that we don't understand. That it's not like when we were in school. It's different now. You didn't have the internet when you were in school, you old lady, you know. And so they just kind of dismiss us as the establishment, and they listen to each other in a way that they don't listen to us. It's very humbling.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I think it's really important when you're working with a child that you are thinking about that constantly, that you're thinking about, well, what do the peers care about, not what I care about necessarily. Like, I'm not going to teach all the play skills that I think the child should be playing, or like all the games that I want my child to play, because I'm going to obviously pick like really educational ones that I want my child to do, or like really like, you know, intellectual, whatever, or it looks really good and pretty, and they have like little wooden toys and this kind of thing. Like, I need to be thinking, what do the peers really care about here? And yes, teach those wonderful other things, but make sure that your child knows how to play video games, for example, knows how to like play chess or be flexible about playing games, because kids, that's the other thing, is like it's important that we play with kids in a way that their peers are going to play with, and teach them how to deal with the fact that kids are always changing the rules, and they're always you know, flitting from one thing to another thing. They don't necessarily play the game the whole way through. Sometimes they'll play something for 5 minutes and then they want to play something else, and we want to teach them how to talk about things that their peers are interested in as well, and just have knowledge about it, and that's going to help them develop friendships and fit in as well.
Really important things to know. Now, I know you did a webinar recently on bullying. Is that something, if people want to have more information, that they can have access to? Is that?
Sure. I think it is on the web. I don't know what
we'll find out about that.
But yeah, I think the webinar is definitely on or there's a link to it anyway, I think, somewhere. So Emily could get that from Sarah Sharaf, who works with Adele. Emily. And then I think if
we can get access to it. In any case, we'll get access to it, and we'll post that on our Facebook page.
And it basically has, I think, information on there.
And really important about a whole bunch of different things, because there's no way we can talk about all the different things in 40 minutes here. But there are lots of things that we can do to empower our kids, to empower our classrooms, to empower our teachers, to empower ourselves as parents. But I just want to go back over one of the things that you said in the beginning, because I think it's so important that what you said, first of all, about parents not thinking that they're wrong and asking for help and support at the school. I think that cannot be said enough. That it's okay for us to be squeaky wheels when it comes to this. And I know that
teachers too. Like, you know, if you're a teacher, it's okay don't be afraid of being wrong. You want to make sure that it's about prevention here. So just reminding yourself that you're trying to prevent these children from suffering, or prevent kids from not being able to access an education and so on. And it's a lot harder to undo something than it is to prevent it, really. It can be a lot more effort initially to set up a lot of preventative strategies, but in the long run, it's much better, obviously.
And something that you had touched on before is that even if you see the child being bullied, even if the child seems to be oblivious to it, that it's not okay to let it to continue to happen. If the child does not seem to be aware that they're being picked on, you said this to me recently and said, but you know, there is that possibility that down the road, when they understand things, that they're going to go back and remember that and be traumatized by something that happened before. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's really important to bear that in mind, that just because it may not seem like it's important right now, or that the child's affected right now, there's always the possibility that later on it might affect them. And of course, we don't want other kids to see that as being okay. That's the other thing, like, or other kids to think that your kid doesn't care, or it doesn't matter, and for the bully too, we don't want the bully to continue thinking that that doesn't mean anything, that behavior.
I can remember very early on, like probably the first time that my son was ever teased, and it wasn't bullying, but he was being teased, and it was on a playground before he started school, and he was completely oblivious, had no functional communication skills at that point. And I remember having that moment where I thought to myself, well, at least he doesn't understand. At least his feelings aren't hurt by it. You know, I guess that's a mixed blessing in this, you know, a hand that we've been dealt. And I remember the first time that he realized he was being teased, and having the realization of, okay, you know, he gets it now. And it never occurred to me that we never want to be in a position where we're saying to ourselves, oh, well, at least he doesn't get it right now. That we really have to be mindful of the fact that there's the possibility that on some level that they're mindful of it, or later on they're going to realize, and that it will be just as traumatic. Really important.
And remembering that, you know, the bullying can have an effect just because your child isn't able to verbalize or vocalize that, oh, that's affecting me. It can still have negative effects on their behavior, because you know, you don't just, somebody doesn't do something to you and then it doesn't have any effect. It's likely that it will have some kind of negative effect.
Even though sometimes our kids, especially when their receptive language skills aren't great, or they don't seem to react to things, we can't assume that it's not registering in some way. We always want to be very mindful of the fact that they have the same rights and feelings as anyone else.
And like you pointed out earlier, that kids observe, and if a kid, say someone's being aggressive to your child, and they may not understand that that's bullying or have an emotional response to it, but it still may affect them how they then interact with other kids, and they may then start to be aggressive or imitate that behavior with other children. So you're really, really being mindful of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We had a question that came in a little bit earlier, and it's one of those questions, it's just a few words, but it is this huge, huge topic. And so I want to touch on it briefly, that somebody wrote in and said, how can I get my girls to talk? And I got to tell you, as a parent, like, you know, like stab me in the heart, because that one little phrase says so much. But here, I want to be 100% clear that there's so much there that it would take hours and a conversation and somebody needing to meet your children, but on a very basic level, keeping it as basic as possible. It's so important that your children get help that they need. We talk on the show all the time about functional communication skills.
Yeah, I think it's very important that you are somehow able to, or you're able to get access to somebody who understands functional language. I think that's the key, and that means that they understand how words are used and not just don't just have the goal of teaching words for words' sake.
Right.
Because if we look at how language develops when you get very young children, that they do start with just kind of babbling a lot of nonsense noise, but that then starts to be shaped into words. And the reason that happens is because we start to use them functionally to get things for ourselves. And if we just concentrate on trying to teach the form of the word, I hope this makes sense, but if we just concentrate on teaching the form of the word, and it's not useful, and we don't use reinforcement, and reinforcement is really, really, really the key, then it's going to be very hard for our kids, because they really do acquire the language when it becomes useful to them.
Right. And so important, and we say this all the time on the show, so important that you have access to a BCBA who has training with autism. Not all BCBAs have training with autism.
That's very true.
And that, you know, in the case of verbal, spoken language, I'm already confusing myself because verbal doesn't always mean spoken, but, you know, if you're trying to get to spoken language, you know, there are some cases where that is not going to happen because of other issues where you would want to consult with medical.
Right. But it's very important to emphasize that even if your child is not talking, like vocal speech, all children can communicate. And so communication is what is the key, and it's finding a way for your child to communicate that's appropriate.
Right. And in some cases along the path, children are taught functional communication as a gateway to that spoken.
Exactly.
Yeah. So important, ABA, a BCBA, perhaps a trip to a medical doctor, huge question. You know, and so I feel like we're giving you that, you know, this little tiny answer, but hear me when hear Evelyn when she says that all children can learn to communicate. And that's where you got to put that's the basket you got to put your first eggs in, is how are you going to teach that to your child. And ABA.
It's almost teaching the value. It's, you know, once you're getting your kids teaching the kids the value of communication to get their needs met in whatever form that is, and really when you're looking for someone to help you, just make sure that they have experience in autism and that they have experience and understanding of language, of communication, and the function of language, and teaching functional communication.
Yeah, really super important, and we can talk more about that in the weeks to come, about teaching functional communication skills. Maybe that's something we could have you help us out with. Okay, we're about out of time, so I want to tell you thank you so much for being here. I just so always appreciate all the information that you give us. It makes me a better parent, Evelyn, and it means a lot to me, so thank you so much for being here.